noite aos que também estão nos assistindo em outro horário. O encontro
And the systems of the Mercosur is a moment of reencounter and of our commitment to this financial sector. We have planned this event with care. We hope that our understanding and to get to know people from Mercosur is a moment of learning. This year, to accomplish this event, is really sensitive of non-understanding of the Mercosur and the limitations of opportunities for budget and renewal for new and
Even then, we follow with the event to understand our duty to contribute to the integration and cooperation. As to the fragmentation and the isolation, that is, there are trends that have been manifesting more and more intensively in our present situation. We are facing acute crises and chronic problems, and we need our current contribution to your contribution to find solutions and that are feasible. Promoting transborder payments that are accessible and efficient and cost benefit are in our mandate and in our duty to face all of these challenges. I'm honored to receive here four professionals of famous ones that share this strategy that they designed and the results that they were achieved. We're going to start with our Reserve Bank colleague from the General responsible for the liquidation department, Mr. Bonvissen, and from the BIS Innovation Center, Ms. Nolan, and responsible for many innovative projects that are here, especially the project Embridge. And our colleague from the Central Bank of Brazil and head of the Department of Financial Structure, Mr. Duarte, that leads the team that was responsible for the PICs. And our colleague, the head of division of the Department of International Affairs of the Central Bank of Brazil, that conducts our local payment systems with our Mercosur partners. I thank you hugely, the four speakers, and I thank the presence of the members of the Financial Mercosur here with us. And I also thank the effort of Coinch and Comum that enabled this event. And finally, Ms. Flávia Carvalho that is going to finalize this event and sponsor this initiative. Please, Mr. Bonvi. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk on the cross-border payment linkages. And it is my privilege to be addressing this gathering. I will try to share the presentation here. Okay. Is the presentation? 1 second. Yes. Is the presentation visible and I am audible? Yes. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you well, and the presentation is shared.
Okay. I'll try again. Am I audible and my screen visible, please?
Yes.
If someone can confirm that.
yes, we can hear you. It's all okay.
So This
If you could put your screen in a full mode, please.
see the small screens. I am not able to.
I think you can click at the bottom to go to the full screen mode. Next to notes, yeah, I think so. Or the other one. Next to the minus sign. Close to the minus sign. Notes. Yeah.
There is an icon right there next to the minus sign in the bottom that you can click. It's the presentation mode. So the presentation mode, you can share with everyone else. It's right. No. You are really close to it, but go to the left. No, don't click on the minus. Yes, click on there. Ah, no, the other, the icon. Yes, there you go. Now you are in the last part of the presentation. You need to go back to the beginning. No. Yes, it's because it's the end of the presentation. You need to click again. Click again on the same place that you clicked before. Yes, that icon. No, not this one. Not this one. The other one. Yes, that's okay. Perfect.
Is it okay now?
Yes, it's perfect. We can see it. You can start.
Okay. Remove this one. Okay. Now I can take this to the side. This one? Yes. That's it? Yes. Okay. We're good to go?
Yes, we are. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry for the trouble and okay, let's start. So I was saying that the integration of UPI and Pay Now payment system, it has been getting noticed in the world of digital payments. The unified payments interface, that is UPI, that's a popular payment system in India that allows user to transfer money from one bank account to another instantly. At the same time, PayNow is a similar payment system in Singapore that allows for fast and secure fund transfer between the banks. The integration of UPI and PayNow payment systems aims to make cross-border payments easier and more efficient for individuals in both countries. This integration enables user to transfer funds seamlessly between India and Singapore without relying on additional intermediaries. Now, about the UPI, as I said, it's a fast payment system in India. It's developed by National Payments Corporation of India. That's an entity regulated by Reserve Bank of India. Since its launch in 2016, UPI has emerged as the most preferred retail digital payment mode that is available 24/7 for both person-to-person and person-to-merchant transaction. Today, UPI contributes to about 80% of volume of the digital payments in India. Last month, that is September, the UPI processed 10.56 billion transactions worth about 190 billion USD. The ecosystem has 484 banks live, along with 24 third-party application providers, we call it TPAPs, and share of P and P2P transactions. By volume, they stand at close to 40% and 60%. PayNow is a real-time peer-to-peer fund transfer payment system that operates in Singapore. It was launched in 2017 by the Association of Banks in Singapore and is regulated by Monetary Authority of Singapore. Now, PayNow allows individuals and businesses to send and receive money instantly using their mobile number or national registration identity card number or foreign identification number or unique ID. So these are all virtual payment addresses. Now, see, India is the world's largest receiver of inward remittances flows. As per the World Bank Migration and Development Brief 38 issued in June 23, India received 111 billion in 2022. However, the cost of remittances are still an area of concern, as the report highlights that remittances cost to India features amongst the highest cost corridors. We can see from the chart here that the cost of remittance from Japan to India is at around 10% for a USD 200 equivalent transaction. And from Thailand to India, it is even more, even though it has slightly come down in 2022. Now, aligned with the G20 objectives of developing a real-time, cost-effective, transparent, and accessible alternative for cross-border payments, the initiative of linking UPI with other fast payment systems was conceptualized. Singapore is the first to go live in that. Now, for achieving the objective of enhancing cross-border payments through bilateral linkage, it's based on certain principles, which says that a payment system is a public good infrastructure. Interoperability is key to reduce cross-border transactions, and avoiding to reinvent or learning from others is the way to go. What it signifies is that the mutual learning and knowledge sharing between countries and financial institutions help in streamlining the processes and avoid common pitfalls. By studying successful implementation and leveraging existing infrastructure, we can establish efficient FPS linkages more quickly and effectively, benefiting from the lessons learned by others in the field. Singapore had developed the first FPS linkage with Thailand, that is Pay Now Prompt Pay, in 2021, and was the first interlinkage in the world. In case of UPI Pay Now linkage, we had adopted some technical specifications and learned from the experience of Pay Now system as how to establish communication with other fast payment systems. It included establishing governance structures, which means the project steering committee structure and creation of working groups. Now, based on these principles, we have taken several initiatives for taking the UPI to the other jurisdictions for enabling cross-border personal remittances as well as cross-border merchant payments. The bilateral linkage of fast payment system for sending and receiving cross-border remittances, that is integration of UPI with Pay Now. Now that is P2P as well as a P2M transaction also. So the Indians visiting, they can scan the code there and make payments in INR. Then extending the benefit of UPI to the travelers to India, payments here. So Forex can be loaded INR and repatriated on return. Now to begin with, the facility was allowed for the nationals from G20 countries, and going forward the facility will be extended to all the other countries. And then the third part is acceptance of UPI codes by QR codes. Now this is bilateral linkage of fast payment system for enabling acceptance of UPI at the merchant outlets in the foreign jurisdictions through the QR codes. So now we'll go to the UPI Pay Now linkage specifically. The fast payment system linkage between India and Singapore, that is UPI Pay Now, it went live in February 23, and this facility was launched in the presence of Honorable Prime Ministers of both the countries. This is first such linkage for India and second for Singapore. They had done with Thailand first. Besides, there are many highlights associated with the linkage, like it is the first cloud-based connectivity between two fast payment systems. First time there is a participation of a non-bank in a linkage. So in Singapore side, there is a non-banking entity that is a participant. This is a network-to-network arrangements purely. And in this case, there are capital controls in one country, that is in India. And for that, there is API-based real-time compliance screening by the banks. The linkage has enabled users of both two fast payment systems in either country to make convenient, fast, safe, and cost-effective cross-border funds transfer using their respective mobile apps. Funds held in bank accounts or e-wallets can be transferred to or from India using just the VPA, that is the virtual payment address. It can be mobile number, it can be UPI ID, it can be national ID, it can be anything, whatever the system pushes in place. Now, both PayNow users in Singapore and UPI users in India, they can send money to each other by using the recipient's unique identifier in their respective payment system. This makes cross-border payments between India and Singapore totally frictionless, without any reliance on any additional intermediary parties or systems. To begin with, there are 6 banks from India side and 2 entities from Singapore side. They're live in the linkage. We are working to now expand it to 20 banks in India, which is going to happen. We are targeting to do it in the next 3 months. So far, the per day transaction limit is 1,000 Singapore dollar equivalent. And the money is remitted across the border in real time. It generally takes less than 30 seconds for the completion of the transactions. The settlement is done on T+1 basis between the settlement banks on either side through Nostro-Vostro. As I said, going forward, more banks as well as third-party apps will be enabled. Now, the key benefits of the linkage will be that there is no need to onboard into each other's system. It is as seamless as a domestic transaction using a beneficiary identifier, which can be a mobile number or a virtual payment address. It provides 24/7/365 real-time cross-border remittance facility for the users of both the countries. Now, the validation of beneficiary information before making the transaction, it instills the trust and confidence in all the stakeholders. It enhances transparency by upfront display of remittance amount in both the currencies with applicable fees and charges. And it is cost effective compared to the other available modes of remittance with similar features. There are various challenges which came during the implementation of the project. One was the varying capital convertibility status. India is not fully convertible. It is Indian rupee is convertible on the current account, but not on the capital account, whereas Singapore dollar is fully convertible on both current and capital accounts. There are some country-specific rules and requirements for transactions involving foreign exchange in India, which needed to be taken into account while finalizing the processes for enabling remittances using real-time fast payment systems. The limit checks for outward remittances that need to follow country-specific regulations in this regard. The KYC and AML CFT related requirements from either side will need to be understood and taken into account while sharing payment messages, which requires technical developments. The requirements will also have to be examined from data privacy related legal requirements of either jurisdiction. And then there are varying technical standards and legal requirements. In this case, UPI use the proprietary messaging standards, while PayNow in Singapore, they use ISO 20 or 22 standards. Now, the compatibility was established by, building a middle layer, which was done by NPCI from India. So they are able to convert the ISO 22 messages from Singapore into their proprietary and vice versa. Then you require a customer consent for sharing personal details with the international remittance partner for inward remittances. This was not required for the domestic transactions and is getting built now to align with the Personal Data Protection Act, which is recently enacted in India. Then, in a system, you have to ensure that the bank's earnings are protected. They are the stakeholders. So unless they are able to earn out of the system, they will not be a willing partner. And this is all a market-driven structure. So unless the bank's earnings are protected, there is no way to go forward. Now, there is a limited time zone difference between Singapore and India, and that came in a little handy. And also that the fast payment systems are 24/7. Then there were customer service aspects, which I will check later. Now, strong political support from both the governments, that was very, it was, they kind of drove this initiative and gave all the support to the central banks and also pushed the stakeholders to go forward with this. So a strong political support is very important when we are establishing something like this. 24/7 operations for both the fast payment systems, that was a plus, that was an enabler. As I said, lower time zone difference, that was an enabler. Then both the sides, we've used an extensive APIs have been used. Now both the systems, they encompass integration of several APIs, and in the UPI Pay Now linkage, both sides use APIs in the lookup leg and the financial leg. A few examples could be customer ID validation, account details fetching, compliance screening, debit and credit request to the banks, forex conversion, confirmation to customers, debit and credit, etc. The flexibility was shown by both the sides, it's easy to be shown, to adopt best practices of other jurisdictions. There was collaborative approach in adopting common technical standards, settlement mechanisms, governance structures, creation of working groups, etc. And to begin with, certain flexibilities were provided for either jurisdiction, like requirement of address of the remitter. That facility, that field was not available, so some flexibility was given that you can start without that, and that can be built later. Then in India, we have a liberalized remittance scheme, which is within which we make the outward remittances of foreign exchange. So that was relaxed for an instant payment up to a certain limit, and that is why we have a smaller limit of transaction, that is 1,000 Singapore dollar. Now, this is a snapshot of the operations and the settlement system participants in the UPI Pay Now. On the left side, you have the remitter bank. We have taken on the left-hand side, from Indian side, we have taken international zone as the Singapore side. And the remitter bank, there is one DBS bank is there. And then there is another non-bank party, which is a liquid pay wallet. And the DBS is both a remitter bank as well as a settlement bank. On the middle, in the Indian side, we have a compliance screening. That is, we call it a authorized dealer bank, AD bank. So now they do the compliance screening. Then the settlement services are provided by two banks, which is DBS and Axis Bank. Now the AD banks, there are 6 of those banks. Then within the system, we have a payment system provider bank. That's a bank who onboards the customers. That is for domestic system, and same continues in this also. So it onboards the customer, validates the UPI ID, customer name and bank name, and then you have a beneficiary bank. In case of UPI Pay Now linkage, RBI has adopted a joint governance approach. The governance model is divided into 2 phases: pre-launch phase for project development and implementation, and post-launch phase once the linkage is live and stable. During both the phases, the individual operator in both the jurisdiction, they retain control over the technical and operational aspects of the interlinking arrangement infrastructure, that is standards, scheme, software, and network at the domestic level. Now, in the pre-launch phase, governance during the project development and implementation phase, that is managed through a project steering committee, that's PSC, with designated heads of the payments department of the respective central banks as co-chairs. The PSC completes all the stakeholder linkage, including the payment system operator, and participating financial institutions, such as banks and non-banks on both the sides. Further, under the agency of PSC, working groups in place for functions such as business, commercial, operations, legal and compliance, and IT and security. These working groups, they conducted regular meetings to discuss the issues pertaining to their respective domains. The PSC acts as a forum for addressing the challenges faced by the working groups. In the post-launch phase, the PSC has been addressing the aspects related to expansion of the scope of linkage by adding more participants, transaction limits, purposes, automating the dispute resolution processes, and removal of anomalies in the processes and sub-processes. Now, with the expansion of scope and coverage of UPI PIN linkage, the challenges related to settlement report sharing, deemed transactions, transaction declines, they have also increased. The PSC reviews the status of such issues and deliberates on the solutions. Once the full-scale rollout of UPI PIN linkage is achieved, formation of a joint oversight panel that has been envisaged for performing the oversight function. Now, in that also, both the networks will be there, the concerned banks will be there, and this will have the oversight of the central banks and both. It will be facilitated by the central banks on both the sides. Thank you. That will be from my side.
Mr. Gonvi, many thanks for a delightful presentation. Eu agradeço a apresentação muito bem.
I thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. It was really well built, really clear, really precise, especially this fact of reporting something that has already worked, where we had a pragmatic view for a problem that was really well designed, really well understood and addressed. And now, before the questions, I would like to explore two aspects. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel, and the second one is that we should have flexibility from both parties, and that is one of the highlights that I would like to tell you in your presentation. Now we are going to have a round of questions to continue. I'm going to like to pass the floor to Benedict Nolans, the chief of BAS hub in Hong Kong.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you, Marcelo, for having me. Let me seek to share the screen and make sure this works. I think it's this one. Can you see? You can see the slide, right?
Yes, we can. You just have to go to full screen mode. Can you put it on full screen mode? Yeah.
A slideshow.
Yeah, a slideshow at the, yeah, good. Yeah.
Is this full screen?
It is.
Good. So I will present you the Enrich project and including an update on where we stand. So the context of the Enrich project is to focus on cross-border payments in specific and seek to build, with the use of distributed ledger technology, a multi-CBDC platform. So a common platform where the central banks use CBDC in order to facilitate cross-border payments. The key principles that we follow in this project is to make sure that we safeguard the currency sovereignty and monetary and financial stability of each of the participating jurisdictions. And we follow the principles of compliance, do no harm, and interoperability that had been set out by the G7 in relation to CBDC. So to put it simply, each central bank is the exclusive issuer and redeemer of its CBDC, only domestic commercial banks can request the issuance and the redemption of local CBDC, and central banks can set balance and transaction limits for their respective commercial banks. In terms of why did we embark on this project called mBridge, it goes back to the flaws, you could say, of the current correspondent banking system. Now, I want to be a bit, let's say, balanced about the correspondent banking system, having been myself in the correspondent banks. I do think, in fact, that they've played a very critical role and continue to play a critical role in payments. But at the same time, we also do know that there are some flaws in the system, or that maybe the system can be improved with new technology. So to put it simply, currently the process consists of a payer interacting with the payer bank that goes through the payer correspondent bank, over to the payee correspondent bank, to the payee bank, over to the payee corporate. So in this process that you see on this slide, in fact, there are these 4 steps in the middle, these 4 banks. Now, these 4 banks are each repeating a number of controls. And one of the controls they are repeating is, for example, AML-related obligations in terms of transaction surveillance. In addition to that, they each have credit exposure. So there are also other risk processes that are being followed by these different banks. So in a concept of mBridge, you remove these 2 intermediaries on the bottom, and there is a direct interaction between the payer bank and the payee bank. So according to basics, you could say, of operational efficiency, you have now created a more straight process flow, which should be, theoretically at least, a more a better or a simpler process flow. So in the current correspondent system, we do see relatively high cost. We see settlement risks, low speed, and certainly low transparency, operational complexities, and also limited access. There are certain countries in the world that are being serviced by very few correspondents now, and for them, the cost of international remittances is consequently some of the highest in the world. Let me just give you a personal experience that just happened in the last few days to me. I did do a transfer to another country in Asia, and the transfer was actually this time relatively fast. It did end up in the beneficiary account the next day. The problem was I made a mistake on the account. So I had put a Hong Kong dollar account, and it was actually a US dollar payment. So the receiving bank, in this case the payee bank, kicked back the money, and it routed back through the correspondent system. And I can tell you, in this case, the routing took 10 days. So it took 10 days for the money to come back, and it took 10 days for complete lack of transparency as to where the money even was. So neither the payer bank, nor the payee bank, nor any of the correspondents knew where the money was until it, after 10 days, came back. So that is just an example even of the last week, really. The money only arrived back on Tuesday, of still some of these flaws. So even though a lot of the payments in correspondent banking are now faster than they used to be, certainly there are still issues. So, as mentioned, with an approach like mBridge, the number of intermediaries and steps can be significantly reduced, allowing direct bilateral connectivity between the payee and the payer local banks, and allowing these cross-border payments, therefore, to be faster, from several days to instant, safer. They're settled in the safest asset, which is CBDC, which would reduce the settlement risks and correspondingly the risk that the banks need to account for. It would be more accessible, cheaper as well because of the reduced settlement risk, and the system should be as compliant because the banks are applying their same KYC, AML, and CTF processes as they are applying today. So how does the Enbridge work in practice? You can see we have the corporates interacting, as I mentioned, with their commercial banks. The commercial banks are on the platform and they interact with their central bank and ensure that the payments would be made through this payment infrastructure. This payment infrastructure in this case is a custom developed permission-based distributed ledger technology that we call the Enbridge Ledger or the MBL. And it supports this real-time peer-to-peer and atomic cross-border payments and FX CBDC transactions. The solution is EVM compatible, which is Ethereum virtual machine compatible. The CBDC issuance, redemption, and payments is written in Solidity, the smart contracts. And a consensus algorithm is the so-called dashing consensus algorithm. There is a public paper about it if you want to take a look at it. It is a BFT consensus protocol, and it was in this case chosen over Hot Stuff Plus because it is in this case better matched to the needs of this type of a system. And the needs are typically, as you know, they include transaction volumes and speeds. In addition to that, there is the use of privacy technologies like pseudonymous addresses and encrypted payment metadata payloads to support transaction privacy. The APIs are ISO 20022 compliant to support current and future interoperability and streamline deployment and operation. And furthermore, the system can support LEIs, legal entity identifiers, which further support interoperability. The way the technology works is that the core component of the system is the so-called Enbridge Ledger node, which are the DLT nodes. Central bank nodes are validator nodes that take part in the consensus protocol. The commercial bank nodes are ordinary nodes, and they do not take part in the consensus protocol. Of course, additional elements include the UI and the backend to the system. A question we get very often asked is, do I need a CBDC in order to be connected to Enbridge? And the answer is you don't, because this connects via APIs to your standing RTGS systems. And these APIs, as said, are ISO 20022 based. So for commercial bank, cross-border payments and FX transactions are conducted through the interaction with their core banking systems and the Enbridge backend. And for central bank, CBDC issuance and redemption operations are supported by the integration of the Enbridge into domestic payment systems such as RDGS. I guess I won't dwell too much on this, other than the last point, is that through the implementation of pseudonymous addresses, using randomly generated self-issued key pairs, the platform ensures that sensitive transaction details can only be viewed by the counterparties to the transaction and their respective central banks, and also the issuing central banks. So in sum, if it doesn't concern you, you can't see it. That's the principle that is being applied here. And that is viewed as important among central banks. I think we often speak about privacy in an individual context, but central banks also have a need for privacy if they were to be on such a shared infrastructure. The governance of the system comprises of a steering committee currently supported by 4 subcommittees, in particular a compliance subcommittee, technology subcommittee, legal subcommittee, and policy subcommittee. So the technology, legal, and policy subcommittee have been operational for about 2 years now. It is quite obvious that the technology subcommittee is working on software development, including all the aspects described, including the consensus mechanism and the APIs, for example. Also, of course, developing or having developed all the requisite manuals that go with that. While the legal committee is in charge of setting the rule book and the platform terms that the parties sign up to. Currently, it is one rule book for the different participants, including the central banks, the banks, and also the so-called administrator. I'll come back to the administrator later, but that administrator is a flow-through function for the IP in this system. And then furthermore, we have a policy committee that very much is concerned with studying questions around financial stability and monetary policy, but that over time will probably need to add aspects such as developing policies, for example, on complaint handling, and also more broadly reporting. The compliance committee, we are still in the process of developing it. But the way we see that evolve is that this committee will be in charge of ensuring that all aspects of the rulebook are complied with. And also, we may need to extend that into some forms of risk management. So I would look at these committees as currently an evolving matter. From a legal perspective, we do have, as mentioned, the rule book, which is entered into by the various participants. It is supported by some additional legal agreements. For example, there are some jurisdiction-specific and CBDC-specific terms. And also, in certain instances, the banks may still want to enter into bilateral terms between them, which we call the bilateral MLINK terms. I mentioned I would come back to the role of the administrator. So in a technology like this, there is, of course, intellectual property. This intellectual property is being licensed to the administrator. At current, the administrator is the BIS. And the administrator, currently the BIS, is onward licensing that IP to every single central bank participant. And these are onward licensing it to the commercial participants. So the idea is that in this distributed system, every central bank can actually add IP. So the IP creator can be any central bank, and consequently, any central bank would pass that license on to the administrator, who would onward license it to these others. I would note that the intention of the MBridge is to be public good, which means there is no profit-making intention in this, and therefore the IP is not being preserved for the purpose of profit-making, but more for the purpose of having every central bank keep the IP over the aspects that they have contributed. We have a total of 27 members, and these observer members, and they include mostly central banks from around the world. I will show them in a moment. Also the IMF, the World Bank, and the FATF. You would say these people come from different perspectives. Central banks come from the perspective of monetary and currency sovereignty, economic and financial stability, and gaining greater access to global payments and promoting cross-border trade. The IMF from the perspective of promoting financial stability and monetary cooperation, World Bank from the perspective of financial inclusion. As I mentioned, some jurisdictions have now a very low ability of access through correspondent banking, and FATF from the perspective of enhancing AML and CTF compliance and efficiency. So at current, these are the 27 global observing members, and you can see they come from any parts of the world. We do have the Central Bank of Chile in the LATAM continent at present. I would note this has not been published and therefore should not be published, but we will be publishing it in about a week's time. So the target of the Enbridge is to progress to an MVP stage, which entails continued work on this technology, legal, and governance front. We continue welcoming more MVP participants. We continue investigation of solutions to FX liquidity and AML and CTF, and this will continue for quite a while. We also continue exploring the desirability, feasibility, and viability of this network. We do think the desirability is met. We do think the feasibility is met. The viability is contingent on the number of participants and interested parties. And this network, we hope also can serve as a test bed for innovation, including for other projects of the BIS Innovation Hub that have concerned these topics, but also for private sector. And we are in that regard exploring with the winners of the G20 tech sprint and also the shortlisted whether they want to conduct POCs in the next year on the Enbridge. So in sum, the idea is to use this for cross-border payments through the issuance and redemption of CBDC. It does not require a national retail CBDC. Participants are connecting, the participating central banks are connecting through the use of APIs. The system involves decentralization with the central banks operating a node. It is a two-tier system as the banks onboard onto the platform and they onboard the customers as they do every day. It involves the banks, therefore, continuing to do AML, CTF, and sanctions checks. It adopts international interoperability standards like LEI, ISO, and ISO 20022. And in that regard, the Enbridge actually fosters the exploration of 9 of the CPMI building blocks on cross-border payments. So with that, I will pass it back to the moderator.
Margarita. Muito obrigado pela sua apresentação.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really clear for us. Thank you so much for showing your project. We have been following the steps that you have been going through. We have the generous invitation of participating as an observing member. We are still looking for that in our board. We have the expectation of joining you in this distinct 27 and out. We hope to be the 28th observing member as part of this project. We think that is really interesting for us because here in Mercosur, with our partners of the Central Bank of Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, we have bilateral agreements to enable our trade to be faster. We started in 2008, and it can be a source of inspiration for a future evolution in the area. Not only in this point that we would like to start here the Q&A session, I'm going to use the privilege of being a moderator and to ask questions as well. We have seen 2 models, 2 approaches, and 2 projects. RBI has presented this bilateral P2P business, and you guys have shown another understanding of governance, this shared governance among participants with this structure and with this benefit. So I thank you both very much and congratulate you both. And now I open the floor for the questions directed to both. I don't know if anyone would like to say anything. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Okay. So I would like to ask a question. First of all, I would like to thank you both for your presentation. Both presentations. I am the chief of the division responsible for ST4, and in regards to the presentation of India, I would like to confirm that the limit of transaction that is done daily is in $1,000 of Singapore, and this limit is by transaction per day. So that means that is just one transaction of $1,000 a day, or can I do many transactions a day with this limit of $1,000? And with the time that this system is already working, is there already an idea of increasing that limit, or is it going to continue 1,000 Singapore? Hello, Mr. Singh, can you hear us? I don't know if you are on mute. You can. I don't know if your connection is down. I suggest going to the next question then. I don't know if he is going to go back, but if he comes back, we ask the question again. Claudia, please. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So I would like to ask a question to Benedict. How is the exchange rate defined in the system?
The translation button. So if someone can help translate a question, that would be good.
Claudio, do you want to rephrase in English? I can do that. He was asking about price.
Yes, I can. I just want to know how the exchange rate between the central bank digital currency is established on the MBG system.
Yeah, so currently the exchange rate in the prior pilot that we did was done between the banks. So the banks agreed on the exchange rate. So it wasn't centrally set on the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess the question is in due course if central banks would provide liquidity into the system, but no decision has been reached on that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, my objective is just to know about that, the role of the central bank on this definition.
Yeah.
Alguma pergunta adicional dos colegas do Mercosul?
Any additional questions from our colleagues in Mercosur?
Do in English saves you from dealing that translation part. As I said, we have this ongoing discussion on Mercosur for quite some time if we should move away from this notion of bilateral links that we have now, which are relatively easier to set up, and go for a more, let's say, centralized or shared infrastructure, a public infrastructure. I'd like to hear your views about this possible transition for a more centralized, And whether do you think this can be achieved in a sense with consensus pairwise, or how important it is to have something like the leadership of BIS as the administrator of the platform? This is one question.
Okay, so in fact, this is a shared common platform or common infrastructure, but at the same time, it is decentralized. So I guess that is the unique thing that DLT has introduced, right? And I always say there's a lot of cynicism sometimes about blockchains for sure, but the use case where they should be useful is if you have multiple parties that want to have a distributed system amongst themselves. And here we have a scenario of indeed multiple parties, multiple countries, and a need for a distributed system because in fact, you should not want a centralized system. And the reason why you should not want a centralized system is because the transactions would be sitting on a centralized system, which would lead to all kinds of questions on the privacy asset of those central banks and maybe up to the privacy of the underlying participants. So in sum, you could say the beauty here is a common system that is distributed. So actually, you could say it's a possible textbook use case, at least on the exploration front for a DLT, right? In terms of the governance, at present, the role of the BIS is really quite narrow. You could say administrator role. So, and narrow to what I showed, which is IP administrator and rulebook administrator. I think your question is whether someone like BIS could play a broader governance role. And I think maybe the way to look at it is that right now we have a steering committee, and how this system grows or let's say gets implemented and adopted, I think will inform that future steering committee structure. So that steering committee structure, for example, could be overlaid by a governing body. And the governing body could be composed of the most senior levels, really, of the central participating central banks. So right now, the steering committee is the committee that is developing the system already with senior level, but not deputy governor or governor level. So when, for example, we just had a presentation by the Banca d'Italia of the European tips and target systems, and that is overseen by the governing council of the ECB, being the governors of all the central banks. So I think there is still a lot of evolution to come here. Of course, the BIS is a good place to at least see how that evolution should happen. But whether it's the BIS or governing council of the participating central banks, I think only the future will tell, so to say.
Okay. You mentioned privacy, and when you describe the technology underlying the Ambridge project, it matches with some decisions that we have ourselves committed to, at least during this proof of concept phase that we are in a CBDC initiative, the domestic one, which has this more wholesale nature. And we also opted to use an EVM compatible distributed solution, and we are exploring also with alternatives for privacy, among them this idea of pseudo anonymous wallets and so far. But the challenge that we are facing now, perhaps this might make more sense in the domestic case than on a cross-border case. I'm not sure, then I ask your advice on that. Is we think that composability of smart contract is also a desirable feature if we have to use the shared or even the domestic platform as something to build upon a more sophisticated, let's say, financial service. going for the cross-border, we hear the RBI case for the bilateral links really specifically targeted to remittances. But if you think about trading finance, that was quite common in Asia and wholesome investment, so on, you might need a little bit more of automation and coding for more sophisticated value-added services. And then you might, how do you see this trade-off of keeping privacy and allowing for more sophisticated interaction between players?
Yeah, I think that's why in the current phase, we are not yet exploring these let's say, programmability features. And the reason is, I mean, it's quite simple. We need to achieve an MVP phase first. And we've defined MVP as a live system with where real transactions are on an ongoing basis, but between limited parties and with limited functionalities.
Okay. I understand. Do you have any other questions from the audience? Temos mais perguntas?
Any other questions?
Interruptions on the system.
I'm just asking if we have any more questions to you. If not, I know it's quite late in Hong Kong. I really appreciate you taking your time. So many thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our deepest gratitude. Have a great evening. Many thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. With that, I will hand over no próximo a nossa agenda aqui.
But in our agenda now, I'll pass the floor to the head of the Department of Competition and Markets, Duarte, to talk about the project PIX. Angelo, go ahead, please. Good morning from everyone in the Argentinian and Paraguayan and Uruguayan Central Bank and everyone that is from Enbridge that are still connected here. You can put the presentation if you have the control, okay? Sorry, I will have a short presentation about the PIX system. And after that, we'll have some time for questions. The main challenges of PIX are is to democratize access to electronic payments, offer less frictions. The slides are in English, right? And offer less friction and payment solutions, support innovation and make new business models feasible with payments, reduce costs of payments and because they're very high, contribute to the digitalization of payments and financial inclusion, and increase competition and foster efficiency in the financial system. Efficiency here means the cost and time. For payment. I'll start with what we understand as the key success factors of PIX. First, it has a very active role of the Brazilian Central Bank, and we have tried for years for the private sector to take the first line, to go ahead, take the initiative for the project, but it wasn't interesting for them, so the central bank decided to do this, to lead the project and it was made by the central bank, and I'll show you in a few minutes, and the central bank has a main role in it. The participation is mandatory for the private sector for payment service providers, the big banks, to reduce the risks of fragmentation so that we can achieve the goals as quickly as possible. So a platform without many participants would take a very long time so that they would connect to the platform. And the success rate is very low. It is a co-creation with the private sector and a lot of transparency for society, for the companies of monitoring of the development of PIX. The use of aliases to identify the payee it's another key factor. The low cost of transactions, because if one of the challenges is to reduce cost, PIX has to have low cost to users. And we also have to take into account the income of the people in the region. They are very user-friendly, the payments, and that's very important to guarantee a very big adoption of the system by the population, considering people that have a very low income and the people that are older, so it has to be super easy to be made. And the strategy that of modern communication as well. And this is an account-to-account transaction. So one person to make a PIX payment has to be in an institution that is joining, that is an associate of this platform. And there is a settlement platform in which everyone has an account, and the transaction goes from a user in one account in an institution and maybe another one in the same institution, or another one that is a participant of the PIX. And the central bank has beyond the settlement platform, it also handles another infrastructure that is not traditional of the financial market. It is a database of the aliases of the accounts. The central bank also has the role of being the owner of the rulebook, which is like the credit cards scheme, and that writes the rulebook on it. It is clear that the central bank also has some mechanisms of consultation to the market and to society when it's drafting or making modifications in the PIX rulebook. At the end of the day, the rulebook is a book of the central bank. And in the terms of participation, as everyone that here that has everyone that must join are the authorized payment service providers with more than 500,000 active customer accounts. These are more than 35 banking and non-banking institutions. And to explain that, the central bank authorizes, regulates, and oversees banks, banks that we call payment institutions. They are issuers of electronic currency. They have an account. They offer a traditional account, but they cannot offer credit. There are around 35 institutions, 30 are around there are banks, and 5 are payment institutions, financial institutions. And we have around 800 participants. Around 600 of them are credit cooperatives. And the central bank also regulates those credit cooperatives. And we also have around 70 banks. And over 100 electronic currency issuers. It's important because the institution that has the most transactions is not a bank. It is an electronic currency issuer. It's Nubank. And there is also the Federal Treasury, which is a participant, and it's the only institution that is not regulated by the central bank that is a participant of PIX. And it is also a participant in the other networks and infrastructure that were made by the central bank. It is also possible that one emitter or issuer electronic currency that is not authorized by the central bank takes part in PIX. And this is because the central bank started regulating the electronic issuers in 2013. And ever since, there is a schedule or timetable for these institutions to uh, go to central bank and ask for an authorization, because before the 2013 law there were many other ones that were not regulated, and nowadays we have some institutions that don't have the license from the central bank, and they'll have to get it in the future after 2028, and then they'll be able to join the PIC system. But in these cases, they'll need a host. that is another financial institution that is authorized by the central bank and maybe is also a bank and will serve as a host of the non-authorized institution to join the PIX system. The participation of the private sector and transparency. That is key. Since the central bank started working with PIX in 2018, we created a system or a forum in which the private sector would be able to offer its opinions, knowledge. That is, this is under the PIX Forum umbrella. And these are for the working groups of security, of messaging, new functionalities, business rules. So this is extremely important because the central bank doesn't know everything. So at the end of the day, the institution that is in contact with people and companies and know what people expect are the ones from the private sector, the banks that issue electronic currency. And the PIX Forum, the technology companies also are part of it, not only the ones from the industry, financial industry. There are also participants of utilities, communications, electricity, of retail institutions or that are potential users of PIX. So we have a very broad participation and the working groups work very smoothly. And when the central bank, when a change is necessary or a significant change in the PIX related to PIX, they ask the PIX forum. They set up a working group to assess the return of the participants, the opinion, the feedback of the participants and of this working group. And then there is the decision of the central bank about the changes and the business rules. And very often, some participants of the forum offer us or offer the central bank suggestions in the change in the business rules that we were not thinking about. And they offer us suggestions, and the central bank works with their input. Sometimes the central bank has to make a public consultation, and people can contribute with it. They can make suggestions and also make remarks. So that is extremely important so that the stakeholders and the major players feel part of the development of the system. And what about the costs of how a transaction starts? Uh, Associate institutions can offer PIX in many different channels, but there is only one channel in which the offer of the PIX is mandatory, which is the banking apps. I mean, there is no app for PIX. PIX is just a functionality or a button that is present in the banks or financial institution apps, and it's mandatory for the participants to offer at least this channel. There are some cases of investment banks that don't have an app, and we open this exception and they can provide this through internet banking. But there is also payment providers initiators that is starting and it's growing, and also ATMs, and I believe that there are very few. The following stage is how to make a payment, how to be paid, and to identify the beneficiary of it or the payee. That is important because there are other ways of means of payment here in Brazil that go from one account to another, and you have to provide a lot of information, and people get lost in the process, and they don't work really well beyond the costs that are very high. So if you have an account, you can give your account a pseudonym or an alias so that you can facilitate their identification, its identification. It can be your cell phone number, or ID, and there is also the CPF number. And for companies, if you don't want to identify yourself, they can use an alias too. But that's basically for cases that involve a payee that is a company. So when you type in the pseudonym or the alias of the account, you can identify the payee in this situation. Another option is to read a QR code that is static. It doesn't change in each transaction, or it can also be a QR code that is used for each transaction and that change according to each transaction. And these are usually the ATMs that are present in stores, and there is an interface that generates a QR code at each transaction. And there is also another option that we say you use copy and paste, because if you're using your cell phone you're using an app and the electronic trade portal, and at the end of this transaction there is a QR code that is generated, and you cannot generate and read the QR code in the same instance. So there is a functionality in which the QR code is transformed into a string. The string is copied from the portal of the electronic trade, and it is sent to your bank. So it is a way for us to use the same cell phone to make a purchase and also to make a payment. On the costs, I didn't have that much time, and I can send you a more thorough version of the presentation with all of the details and costs. There are no fees between the participants of Pix, and it's not allowed that one participant will charge a fee from another participant. The central bank provides 1 cent every each 50 transactions. And that can cover, that's according to the central bank system. The participants can charge fees from the users in one exception, in a transaction that involves two natural persons or two individuals. Even in this case, there is an exception. We know that individuals use their personal accounts for businesses. They're informal, when if this person uses here an account, you can also, if a person receives more than 30 payments in 1 month, the person says this person is using their accounts for businesses, and I'm going to start charging fees for these transactions. Or when other cases of people from fintechs, they have a contract with the customers that are going to charge fees of 150 transactions, and they only charge a fixed amount of fees for transactions. Next one. And these are one of the last slides that have some data. And the volume of transaction at the last semester, we got to 4 billion reais in terms of transaction. And in September, we had, in the first 3 months, we had new 9.4 billion reais in transactions. So, and 85% in terms of transactions are from one individual to another individual. And if a person has a bank account or a payment account and it's connected to the PIX system, this person can send and receive a PIX. And also, this person is participant, and they can make and receive payments. Even if you do not assign an alias to your account, it is possible for you to receive a payment. You instead of just making a transaction that will need the branch agency, the current account that basically doesn't exist for PIX. In the case of payments, business to business, started to grow over time. And now in June, there were 30%. It was 30%. In September was 33%. It's not just a payment for retail stores, but also you can pay the doctor's appointment. You can use the PIX, and a health clinic also. You can pay it with it, and at a hairdresser's, you can use a Pix as well. It's a B2B or business to business. It is not very common the use of Pix in the in-person purchases. I'll explain in a few minutes. It is a lot more common the use of Pix with virtual purchases in the electronic trade or e-trade, especially because they also accept the credit cards, and there is another option for people who don't have them, and you can pay also with a barcode. But that's something that is really old, and it takes a very long time for the store to know whether the payment was made. And even on weekends, they know that the purchase was concluded or was not concluded, and they can start sending the product. In the in-person purchases, credit card is much more convenient. It is accepted, also the debit credit card, and with the extensive use of near-field communication technology, when you approach your credit card to the machine. So the experience is a lot quicker than the Pix. And this is also possible in very small stores when they give you a discount if you pay with the Pix compared to the credit card or a debit card. So if you use the card, you can make payments or pay installments of 5 payments of 20. But if you make a payment in Pix, you also have a discount in this purchase. And these are some of the data. I won't go into further detail here, but we do have around 100, close to 150 million individuals, and among individuals, 80% of individuals and the companies, the rest that have an alias. That is, they registered in their institutions at least one of the keys. So the number is around 135 million people and close to 15 million companies. You can also see in the PIX chart the share of each one of the keys and aliases. The randomic string is the most used because it's used by retail companies, retail stores. But among individuals, they use their cell phone numbers, their tax ID, and their national ID and email. It is possible to assign one key, one alias to each one of the keys. But usually people have 4 aliases or keys, not necessarily in the same account. For example, one person on average has 4 aliases that are registered in different accounts, and that will grow over time because if you have a cell phone number, you can also register it and the tax ID as well, and the email. And over time, people aggregated new aliases to the same account. And the participants as well want people to add more aliases because the more aliases this person use, there is a reduction in possibility to have it in another institution. In the first few months, people rushed to register all possible keys or aliases in one account. And if you use the main aliases, such as a cell phone number, in a account, you won't be able to use it in a different account. So account A will be more used, and I'll finalize here, and I'll answer some questions you want to ask them.
So much for your presentation, for all the details, explaining about pigs. Everyone is very interested about this. And I'm sure that everyone is interested in that. So I'm going to pass the floor now to my colleague, Cloud. If you want, we can do a 15-minute talks at the end. Cloud, you are responsible for the creation of our local payment here in Brazil. So I'm going to stop sharing. So good morning, everyone. We have done a very important station here. See my presentation. Perfect. So this is the SML, which is the local payment we have, and cross-border payments for our bank here in Brazil. I'm going to start talking about the dominating system of the international transactions, especially the trade um, problems that we face, and Ms. Benedict talked about, and she talked about how this brings high costs and that it can be a type of payment that takes a long time and we need more transparency. So in this moment, this is a model where the users are related to the local payments. These institutions are usually institutions that are authorized through the market, and in general, we need to have a contract in these operations. Once the user has already passed this um, information to the local authority, they are going to use that as a reference for all the operation. Usually it's used the US dollar, and then they enter in this flow here in this circuit where we have the corresponding banks. The banks that are going to provide this currency, this USD, and both of these local institutions will need to have a common point in these corresponding banks. And once the financial flow is going through here, they reach the beneficiary bank who is going to send this money to the local recipient. Depending on the currency that is being used and depending on the time zones and the institutes that are going to provide this amount, we have all of this financial flow, and each user is going to charge the rate, and they have to have liquidity for this currency, and it can be more than one intermediate bank here in a currency that is not so common. They can have different positions for different currencies to be able to exchange this amount until it reaches the liquidity of this currency, and with this has high costs. The loss of understanding of this process, and they do not know how many intermediates will be necessary, what is the chain that is going to be used in this flow, and it's a system that has a barrier of entrance because the local institutions, they can have relations or corresponding agreements, and not all of these local authorities have a transaction or under accounts outside of their country. So there are several institutions of different countries and of different currencies, different time zones, different rules. So there is this problem of interoperability and barriers of entrance, and anyway, this is the model, the traditional model of financial flow for international payment, and that is really used for trade. Given these characteristics, the SML provides an integrated system that is going to be an alternative to the system. So it will try to integrate the local payment system of the country, and it will allow the use of only the local currency to the users and the financial institutions. So the Brazilians, for example, will pay in their local currency. The central banks will have a special model in this, a special role in this model, and they will try to make things simpler and they will try to approach the different difficulties that we can face. And how does this work in practice? A normal operation would happen that way. A local user, would go to their financial institute locally and define a certain payment to reach the recipient in the foreign country. And we don't need to exchange this currency. This reduces the cost of the operation, and this user is going to send an amount of currency to this financial institute and will send the same amount for the central bank. How is this money going to reach the final recipient? They will have a common currency between the both of the central banks. The ones that we use the most nowadays are the dollars, and they currently use this, but they can agree on another currency, and they're going to simply put the dollars with this Fed, which is from New York, that is exchanging this amounts nowadays. So the other central bank can do the other counterpart, send it to the local currency of the financial institute of the other country, who will send this resource to the final receiver. So in this model, considering the central part here, the only person that is necessary here to do this transaction is the Fed. And then if we had another intermediate here, this is the institute that would reduce the cargo here, but this is the common denominator of the transaction, only one intermediate. So we have an interoperability because there is a system of communication that is established between the central banks and the users, the final users, and the financial institutions. So we have interoperability, and it's not necessary for each of the users to have liquidity in the currency or to have the final users having that as well. Only the central banks need to have the strong currency. There's less barrier of entrance because the local financial institutions, they don't need to have central uh, currency in the Fed, for example. Only the central bank and all of the institutions have that. So in Brazil, the financial institutions that participate in this, a great majority of them are the ones that are authorized to do this exchange. Um, and due to the ones that are partners, they need to both have less competition in the central bank, which is the case of Brazil, and to not demand that these institutions have a relationship to someone outside. We don't only need to have an account in the bank. So it's a system that allows a precification that is much better because since there's only one intermediate and they have a central bank role, they already establish a exchange rate, and they do this through the interbank system. So for the final users, they have more benefits from this exchange rate. It gives them a lot more benefits because the financial institutes, when they receive this conversion rate that the central bank send through the dollars and the local currency. In Brazil, we have researches that show that this rate is a lot lower than the other ones. And in other countries where the central bank have spreads that are even lower. And the rates, we already know how many intermediates there are, and there is a precification that is only provided by the financial local institute when they provide this currency. And this rate is the pricing that they give is for the same operation because you do not need to do a contract of this exchange rate in the SML. So model that is done by the financial institution. there is this is a administrative process as a one less administrative process that the financial institution has to go through. And in all of this compliance and money laundering combat that we have is done by the financial institution, and they have this compliance for the cross-border transactions as well. This is a flowchart of the financial institution, local financial institution that will send that to the central bank, who will send the US dollars to the Federal Reserve Board, who will send the dollars to the central bank in the other country, who will send the local currency to the final financial institute and the final user. So we only need the Fed, which is the Federal Reserve Board, and this involves the financial institutes and the central banks, and the system works when we sum all of these payments that are done by the central banks and how much they need to receive from the other central bank, and we do that by the net value. So this is a flowchart in Brazil. It takes 3 days for us to do that payment in an SML system, an SML model. We are able to do that in 2 days when we are doing this locally. In Brazil, we have this 3-day flowchart. We are attempting to do that in only 2 days, but the financial transaction takes 3 days nowadays. So this is more or less how what happens when there is an importer from Argentina, and that will send that to the financial institute, who will send to the central bank, who in the third day will receive the central bank in Brazil and then send that to the exporter. The SMLs that Brazil participates in 3 of them: the Argentinian one, the Uruguay, and the Paraguayan central banks. So this started in 2008 in Argentina, 2014 in Uruguay, and in Paraguay since 2018. So we have the goods trade of 360 days for both the 3 countries, and the services linked to these countries or not. In Argentina, they need to be linked to, for example, to this common goods. And when it goes to Uruguay and Paraguay, besides this trade, they can also pay other services that are not related to trade or goods, like energy and other services. The other benefits of Social Security, that is a possibility, and transfers of small values. This can be also done with Uruguay and Paraguay. The currency registration, we can do both of them with the local currencies. The Brazilian exporter, for example, or the Brazilian importer who needs to pay someone in Uruguay, they will pay in real, but the invoice in their contract can be in pesos or in reais. So they can choose. That is for the SML in Uruguay and Paraguay, but in Argentina, it needs to be the exporter's currency. So if it's done in Brazil, it needs to be done in real, or if it's an exportation, ex, if it's an exportation from Argentina, an export from Argentina, it is in pesos. So this design of the SML has advantages. The final user has a lot more practical for him because he reduces the direct costs with the exchange rate. There is also a direct cost reduction because they go to the financial system that gives them a lot more benefits when converting these rates. There is less bureaucracy and reduction of indirect costs and bank rates. There is an elimination of the currency risk for the exporters because you can sell it through your own currency. You can send these invoices in your own currency, and the payments and receipts are much better.
This is much more practical. You don't need exchange contract. You don't need an agreement with a banking correspondent. You just have to follow the rules of the central bank, and you don't need to use strong currency that in which the user, such as a banking correspondent between the central banks, you don't need a strong bank currency. You just need a local account in your bank, and these costs of the operation, they're similar to internal transactions. It's just enough to send a message to your central bank to issue an order of a local currency here and in your central bank, and these transactions in terms of messages, they involve the local systems that are being used. And the central banks, they basically have to set up a registry moment in these operations to receive all of the messages that are at stake in the system. And they don't have any credit risk, considering that the central bank only forwards to its exporter the local currency after having received from the other central bank the necessary dollars for the operation. Costs. Central banks that are involved, they have to develop information systems, both of messaging and of registry. They need a specific department to monitor what the daily operations of the systems are like, and whether the messages are being sent at the correct time and the payments are being made. And the financial institutions have to develop their information systems that integrates them into the system of messaging of the local central bank. They have to register the operation and compliance if it was the same thing for the exchange market. And the users, they have fees that are under market value, especially through considering that it's not necessary to have an exchange agreement, and it's going to be the interbanking one that it's a lot more beneficial to users because users usually have a hard time trying to access this kind of fee. That was it. And now I can answer any questions in terms of financial volumes. The SML between Brazil and Argentina is close to 5% of the Brazilian exports to Argentina that are within the system. It's basically dominated by Brazilian exports, and in this here we have Paraguay and Uruguay, which is there is some balance between the exports and imports, and they are around 5 to 8% of the general trade. And most recently, there were some export operations of electric energy to Uruguay. And when these operations are accounted for, this percentage goes up. But that's the average between the central bank of Paraguay and Uruguay, that is close to 5% of international trade. It seems to be very little, but if you take into account that a lot of the export agenda portfolio between Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, and they are products that are sold in strong currency. I mean, most of it. Sectors that need funding in general are not interested in using this. So when you reduce the total amount of these users that in general wouldn't be so interested, this 5 to 8% are not so little. There is enough room for growth. And on the other hand, if you consider the total of operations in local currency that is made with Argentina, more than 95% of this trade is made with SML, even though the total percentage might not seem so big. Considering the relation between local currencies, the ones that are made with Argentina are almost all of them made with SML for trade. We are making progress in terms of SML. Of course, we're trying to increase this percentage. But at first, that is the overview, and I'm open here to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much. Claudio, thank you for your presentation. The SML is more than a system for us. It is a bond between the countries of Mercosur and to increase investments. But considering the time, I'll open for questions and answers, both for Claudio and for Angelo too. Feel free to ask any questions. Naila, go ahead. Good morning, everyone. I have a few questions. I'll try to ask them in Portuguese. The first one is whether there is a specific criteria to determine the obligation of to the 35 institutions that you mentioned that are necessary in terms of participation for the PICs. And what is the criteria for defining this? This is one of the questions. And another one is whether there is an international agenda of PICs or if there is a planning for this in the future. Thank you. Thank you. The institutions, the one that have to be part of it, are the ones that have 500,000 accounts, active accounts or clients. So these are the institutions that have to join. There is one institution that started to close down accounts because it's very common for a person to open an account in a financial institution, to use it, open it, to leave it open and not use it anymore. So there was an institution that started closing down these accounts so that it would reach less than 500,000 active accounts. But if you have more than this, it is mandatory. International agenda. We don't have effective short-term plans for the connection between PICs and other systems. We follow, as Argentina is doing as well, the CPMI and the efforts for improving the cross-border payments and the Nexus project as well. We're observing it right now. We're not participants in it, and we're following Nexus and the project mBridge that was also presented here. So we do not have short-term projects for the interconnection between the systems. As we have seen in CPMI, it's not something so simple. It's pretty complex. Any other questions? Manuel, please. Good morning. This question is for Angelo. One of the three questions that I had was already answered. So during the time of the implementation of PIX, and there was a very high acceptance by the Brazilian population, I understand that in every country there are barriers in terms of education, considering comparing the rural and the urban areas. And I'd like to know whether there was a financial program education program that was implemented by the central bank, or if there were any strategic partnerships with public institutions or private institutions concerning this. Thank you, Manuel. You also have, you are also, you have a presence here in Brasilia. We could, I'm also in the central bank here. PIX provided the benefit that for many years there was an inclusion process of financial inclusion process. People who didn't have bank accounts that started creating their first bank account because doing a PIX account transaction, you need a bank account. In 2013, with the law of payment for the retail institutions and also with the fintechs, a lot of them started opening accounts for people who didn't have access to the system. And furthermore, we also have the Caixa Federal, that is a public bank that opened bank accounts at very low cost. And with the pandemic, everyone that received the social benefits by the federal government had to open a bank account to receive these benefits. It means that you need to do some work before you have a payment system that will provide access to these people. So it's better to do both at the same time, because it's no use having an account and not using the account. There were many people that had an account at Caixa Federal to receive a benefit from the federal government, but every month they went to the ATM and they withdraw their money, their cash, and some people started leaving their financial resources, and started using PIX. So there is a work that you have to do to include people within the system. And that was only made possible here in Brazil with the poorest people who didn't have access to the financial system. After fintechs started creating digital accounts at very low cost, a lot of people went to a bank, but they had to pay monthly fees. They had to pay for a service package, so there wasn't enough money for them to open an account at a traditional banks. But in fintechs, it was possible, and also in Caixa Econômica Federal, it was also possible. And in the rural areas that you mentioned, 90% of people in Brazil live in cities. They have access to internet. That is, you need to have access to the internet. Nowadays, it's not possible to include a person into the system if there is no access to the internet, because everything is digital. The bank with the digital branches, it's a luxury nowadays, and it's very expensive. The fintech, such as Nubank, that has the largest number of clients with payment accounts in Brazil, has one single bank branch or building in São Paulo. There are no branches around the country, and it has over 80 million customers. And these are things that have to be taken into account to offer a payment low-cost system and to open an account, to offer an account to people. Martin, please. Good morning. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation of Angelo. The members of the commission of Gustavo Gonzalez from Paraguay is asking a question to Angelo. Considering whether PIX can be used outside Brazil, and in coincidence with what you said, I would like to complicate the question a bit more to Angelo, and to mention as an example the cities, the border cities, in which people usually have a lot of mobility between one side and the other side of the border, and as a consequence, they might have a registry in Brazilian PIX and to perform commercial operations on the other side of the border with PIX. And it settles within the registry that it has in Brazil. So these are cities that have a lot of commercial trade. I don't have statistical data to determine that. It's a presumption or an assumption of how the system operates and the characteristic of our borders. So Angelo, can you illustrate a little bit more about the use of PIX in Brazil? All right then. In reality, these transactions are domestic transactions. They are not international ones. There are two different models. There is a model in which trade in a different country, a store has an account in Brazil, or its owner, for example. Salespeople or businessmen in Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina that have an account in Brazil. And what goes on in reality is that a Brazilian is receiving a payment from the owner of the commercial establishment and the other person. And at the end of the day, the owner of this account is going to transfer the funds to another country, or maybe not, but it is a transaction that involves two different accounts in Brazil. That is one model. There is another model that we usually call payment facilitators or payment managers here in the domestic trade, in which the store, each payment, the store doesn't want to have the payment individually made in the account of the retail account. So there is a middleman that receives the payments throughout the day, and at the end of the day, it includes all of the payments and performs a final transaction to the bank account of the store, and sometimes it gets a fee for it, for the service provided. But in all of these cases, it is a transaction between two accounts in Brazil. There is no way to make a PIX transaction between an account that is not with an account that is not within Brazil. In the first model, you have a Brazilian businessman that has a store in Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, and also has an account in Brazil. A foreigner that can open this account here in Brazil. It is harder, definitely. There are some problems with money laundering, for example. And the second model is more professional. That is, there is a intermediary institution that can make a transaction of FX to the account that the store has in its country of origin. So that is seen. That is the model. And it's a similar model that is in Florida. The intermediate of payments at the end of the week, at the day. You pull all of it together and you have the fees, you charge the fees, and you transfer the cross-border transfer. Two models. That seems to be, that was the question, right? If I answer this, we can have a meeting with the department that takes care of money laundering to know how this, whether this is compliant with our rules. But I'm not an expert in money laundering. We have to practice and talk to the department that deals with this topic. In reality, my concern is not focused on this. The question that was asked was whether the fee. The concern is not the money laundering itself. It was basically just a fee. The fee from the intermediate institution. Yes. Yes. It's not a specific one, okay? And truly, what interests us is the inner workings because we're looking into the future. And as we develop the CBDC, logically there will be many processes, and the PIX is a very enriching experience for the development that we're going to make in the future. That's why I asked this. Thank you very much, Angelo. It was very enlightening. There is something else. They can charge the fees, right? It is allowed. And there is a public consultation to the PIX forum. In the second case, an institution that is intermediating this in transactions so that they can, so we can see the second leg of the transaction. For each transaction of the first leg, the central bank will connect to the second transaction in the institution that is the middleman and between the final payee. It can be either an international or national transaction. In this case, it would be an international transaction. So that's what we're trying to thinking in keeping tracing the possibility of tracing the transaction. So I have a transaction between the payment between the intermediate or institution and the beneficiary, and there was a second connection between the second transaction. We're working on this and regulation that will come out in 2024 concerning this. And due to the time, let's finalize here. I just ask Fabio Carvalho, the head of the International Relations Department, to finalize our segment. I thank for the presence of everyone here. And Fabio, please. Thank you, Marcelo. I'd like to say a few words here. And there is an important contribution of the institutions that were represented here for society. It is to promote accessible, transparent, efficient payment methods and cheap ones. And we saw that the presentations reported concrete solutions and feasible solutions for these goals. We also saw details about 2 different quick payment methods that work 24/7 that are very successful throughout the world. These systems, even though they're very different from each other, they are a success concerning promoting the financial inclusions and promoting it as it being promoted as a platform that can be performed by private entities. And they are topping the charts, and they are breaking records, and they keep being perfected. And API from India is being integrated with other countries and other systems, and there are results of this. And in the case of Brazil, we have this agenda of people that are working in the line of integration with other countries. And we also saw mBridge, which is an innovative project, which is a platform that the central banks will establish to make it easier to have cross-border payments. It's a different concept from the ones that we already have in real life. It's a different technology as well that tries to promote agility and cross-border payments. And we also saw the presentation of our system with local entities, with SML, and the Mercosur countries are part of it. And these presentations managed to show that we could reconcile differences to enable these payments to cross borders with agility and security as well. And we need the persistence in articulation that was shown here. This international seminar talks about the financial and monetary integration. Therefore, I'd like to finalize thanking you for the participation that contributed to this event, for everyone that watched this on YouTube, and especially Mr. Ganvi Singh from the Reserve Bank of India and Ms. from the Central Bank also, and everyone that asked questions. It was a very interesting seminar. I wish you all a very good day, and I finalize here. Thank you.